Welcome, everyone, to Hands on Politics. It's not a left-right thing. It's a constitutional thing. Here we have the hottest issues, relevant guests, and brilliant analysis. And I'm the Rich of the Hands on Politics, and I'd like to welcome Ken. Ken, it's good to see you.
Yeah, Rich, it's good to see you too. It's been a while since we've been together on Hands on Politics, and I'm excited to be back talking about the things that we love: politics, America, newsmakers. I'm really looking forward to it. I got to be honest with you. I was a little bit concerned you wouldn't make it back from your vacation. So tell me, how was your vacation?
I went down to Myrtle Beach. It feels good. Feels good to be back in the seat here and talking politics. You know, one thing about vacation is you get a lot more time to follow the issues and been following the trial. And I think we might be hunkering down for some interesting times there in Wisconsin. But I'm really excited about today's show. It's kind of our relaunch from our old Blog Talk Radio days of Hands on Politics, where we're bringing back one of our best guests back in the day. And he's been so prominent in the GOP circles, in the political underbelly. And it's exciting to talk to Chris today. And you have such a special relationship with Chris. Why don't you tell us about today's guest?
Well, today's guest, Rich, is a Republican strategist and communications specialist with over 20 years of political experience. He's the managing partner with the public affairs and communications consulting firm Red Tail Strategies. He's also the afternoon drive show co-host of St. Louis's News Talk St. Louis. He hosts a weekly podcast called Water Cooler Politics with Chris Arps, and he writes regularly for redstate.com. He's also a National Advisory Board member for Project 21, and he is a weekly panelist on Newsmax TV's Wake Up America program. And he's married to Becky Davison, now Becky Arps. And now, Rich, one thing I noticed that is not on his bio, earlier in his life, he supervised the greatest UPS preloader that UPS has ever had. So, Rich, let's welcome to Hands on Politics, a mover and a shaker in U.S. politics, and our good friend, Christopher Arps. Welcome, Chris.
Guys, it's always great to be back with the Hand brothers talking politics. And Ken is right. I did work with probably the greatest preloader in UPS history. I think he's a driver now on the St. Louis Galleria route. But yeah, one of the best workers that I ever had. Ken worked for me also. Ken and I, 30 years ago, working in the middle of the night at UPS, would be talking the issues and politics of the day. And now, 30 years later, we are working together doing politics. It's surreal in a sense. And I have to tell you about Myrtle Beach. We go to Myrtle Beach every year. My father-in-law has a condo down there, and we go down there in May, I think, every year. And Myrtle Beach is one of the most beautiful areas, and I look forward to that trip every year. Love Myrtle Beach.
It was
good
beautiful.
Golf courses.
Oh, it was beautiful. We spent a lot of time there on the beach. Little quieter than the summertime, but it was perfect. We had a great time. It was my first time there, so I will definitely be going back. And Chris, you've been since Blog Talk Radio. The last time we spoke officially, it's got to be I don't even know, Ken, 10 years or so. It's been a long time.
Yeah, 2012, 2013. I think that was the last time we spoke to Chris.
That bio is very impressive. Tell us about the path you took and how you did it, and what's the most valuable lesson you can share with people about getting into the political arena?
I guess, and like Ken and probably you too, Richie, I always have had a fascination with politics. It always interested me. When I was younger, till I became about 21, 22, I was more interested in current events or was more aware of current events. But when I got about 22, 23, I started really getting into politics, the whole left, right, conservative, liberal dynamic. And what really made me a conservative is when I looked at the two philosophies, because I was young then and I wanted to try to pick one that lined up more with my ideology. When it came to liberal philosophy, it was always seemed like you were a victim and that you needed a big brother or some other entity to help you out in life. And it just didn't fit in, with my life experiences. So I became a conservative at a young age. I ended up working at UPS when I was about 21 years old. And later I ended up working with Ken. Ken is the one that introduced me to Rush Limbaugh. And, I worked for UPS for 10 years as a supervisor. I left after the strike of 1997. And I also was going through a divorce. And that's when I just decided that I was going to follow my real passion in life and get involved in politics. And so I started at the absolute ground floor level. I started as a temporary worker at the election board. I quit a job that was a full-time job. It wasn't anything that was a career, but it was just something to do, basically. And I ended up working at the election board that summer. And election boards are set up so that they are divided 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans. So each side can watch each other, so that they're not cheating. They're political patronage jobs. So people usually don't quit those jobs very often. Well, I ended up working there the summer, and a Republican that worked at the election board was quitting. And that ended up opening a spot for me to get a job at the election board. Like a year later, I was promoted. And that kind of started my whole odyssey into politics after that. I worked for a county council person. I worked on a U.S. senator's Senate race. I worked for a United States senator. And then I left in 2005 and kind of started my own business. I started blogging. It was my wife's idea for me to start blogging, but I was still working for the senator at that time. And I figured, I didn't want to be blogging and working for a senator, be putting your thoughts out there. But after I left, I started blogging, writing my thoughts. And that's how that really transitioned to the TV appearances and radio and all of that, was just getting my name out through blogging. And the rest has just been a series of lucky breaks in history, as they would say.
In 2016, I also supported Ted Cruz.
Right.
And you were part of his primary election campaign. Tell us, what was the most interesting part of that primary that you can share with us? That was a very, very interesting time with Donald Trump, former President Trump, and Ted Cruz, because I think Ted Cruz was probably his closest rival.
I don't know if I can pin it down to just one experience, to be frank with you, Rich. I was a guy that was living his absolute dream. Here's a person that watches C-SPAN and MSNBC and CNN and Fox News religiously. And I was on the team that was going around before the senator's bus tour, setting up, making sure all the equipment was together and all of that. And then on the other bus tour, I was what they call a trail car. It was me and another gentleman. And what we did is we trailed the campaign bus wherever it went. So in case the bus broke down or something, the senator or the candidate could get in either one of our cars with the staff, and he could still get to a campaign event on time. I tell you something, a funny story that happened. We were having a closing campaign event at a fairground in Iowa, and the snow had melted, and it was kind of gravel, and it was kind of slushy and everything. I think we had probably 3 or 4 days before the primary, and the bus got stuck in the parking lot with all the gravel. And can you imagine that picture being, on flashed across the news? Cruz campaign stuck in the mud. I mean, it was the worst visual that you could ever have. I was like, oh, this is terrible. But it happened. We got the bus out. But it was just an experience for me of just, we were listening to MSNBC on Sirius Radio, traveling. And here I am, in a car with Ted Cruz and his staff. And we're listening to these events and hearing the people give their thoughts on it, and just going from venue to venue and just seeing the energy of the people and the TV camera setup and the audio. It was one of those things where I was literally pinch me, because I can't believe I'm experiencing this, working on a one of the top one or two presidential campaigns, going around Iowa, meeting people, the media's everywhere, just the energy. It was something experience I will never forget.
Yeah, for us political junkies, that's the kind of thing that we thrive on is, that's exciting for us. Anytime you're involved in a campaign, it's really exciting. And let's talk about some issues that are really important.
Sure.
We only have so much time, so there's a couple of key things I would love to hear from you. Election integrity. Okay. We've got a few things going on. We got the feds trying to pass national election laws, which Ken and I have talked about it. There's a lot of constitutional issues with that because the states are truly responsible for election law. But simple things like passing ID laws, putting some restrictions on mail-in ballots, those kind of things. What is your effort with your election integrity program there? What is your focus to make sure that 2022 is an election that we can put our trust in?
After 2020, we've seen just how important election integrity and how people view the elections, that they're fair and that there wasn't any cheating going on, that's a big part of our elections. We can't, in the future have elections where there are disputes that don't end after election day or after recounts, but go on into following election years. We can't have that. So I'm the president of an organization called Americans for Citizen Voting. And what we are tasked with is we are working with grassroots groups in a number of different states in order to help them convince their legislatures to either pass a constitutional amendment within the legislature to ban non-citizens voting in their elections, or to put it on the ballot to let the citizens decide should non-citizens be voting in their elections. I've been president of this organization for about 3 years. And when I was first approached to head this organization and I heard about non-citizen voting, like most Americans, I didn't think that was an issue. Of course, non-citizens are not voting in our elections. But as I've become more involved with this organization, and you see more and more jurisdictions around the country, from Maine to California, that are allowing people with green cards, they are in this country legally, but are allowing non-citizens to vote in our country. And as we've heard for the last 4 years, when Donald Trump was president, we heard about foreign interference in our election and Russia. Well, I can't think of a bigger foreign interference in our election than having people who have not made an allegiance to this country voting in our elections. Right now, this movement is only to allow non-citizens, to vote in school board elections, mayoral elections, small elections like that. But we know that eventually they're going to want non-citizens to vote in congressional and presidential and governor races. And the rationale for this is, they're saying these people here working legally, they're paying taxes to school districts, they're paying other taxes. And so because of that, they should have a participation in our electoral process by voting. And again, you and I can't go to Canada, we can't go to Mexico, we can't go to any other foreign country and work there illegally and become citizens. So Ken and I and a bunch of other folks have been working fiercely on this issue. We had a big press conference in Georgia, I think back in September, with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger at the State House. He signed our petition to urge the legislature to put this on the ballot in Georgia, to again allow the citizens of Georgia to decide if they want non-citizens voting in their elections. And I can tell you, we've done polling on this, and this across the board, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, black, white, Hispanic, all across the board are in favor of amending state constitutions to say only non-citizens can vote. And I'm proud to say in that petition that we had in Georgia, Ken is the number 2 signature behind Secretary of State Raffensperger. I don't know if that is a good or a bad thing, Ken.
Yeah, Chris, I actually wouldn't say it's been a good thing. I would argue that it's been a great thing, something I've really enjoyed. Being able to talk to the people of Georgia about amending our Constitution to say that only U.S. citizens can vote has been a pleasure. It really has been. As a member of Americans for Citizen Voting, I've had the pleasure of not only speaking at a press conference, but I've had the privilege and the opportunity to go around the state of Georgia to somewhat educate people about this issue and to let them know that we're going to be pushing this with our state politicians. And like you've said, most people are surprised to hear non-citizens can vote in US elections. Right now it's not a huge issue, but that's the time when you have to fix these problems. We need to take action now before it becomes a really big problem. And I do want to be clear that we want it to be easy for US citizens to vote. On the other hand, we want our state constitutions to be clear that only US citizens can vote in US elections. Allowing only citizens to vote, it should be supported by everyone on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives. But unfortunately, one of the reasons this hasn't passed the House in Georgia is because we've had some holdouts on the Democratic Party side. And that's going to be the big push in 2022. We need to put pressure on Democratic politicians to support this common sense initiative. The citizens of Georgia to be the ones to really put this pressure on them.
And Ken, we always try to stress too, and we stress this at the press conference, that Americans for Citizen Voting is not an anti-immigrant group. We applaud the non-citizens that are here in this country, that are paying taxes, that are sending their kids to our schools, that are becoming productive members of our society. All we're asking that if you want to participate in our democracy by voting, that you become a citizen of the United States first. I don't think that's too much to ask.
No, Chris, I don't think that's asking too much, particularly when you think about what some legal immigrants have done to become legal US citizens with the right to vote in US elections. Now, let me tell you a little bit about another project that I'm working on, reaching out to recent immigrants to the United States who are now living in Georgia. I've talked to numerous people who have come here from other countries, including communist countries, and listening to their stories about how they immigrated here have been incredibly touching. I've heard stories about a father swimming across a river from China into Hong Kong to escape communism. I've heard stories about immigrants coming here legally, paying their dues, hoping and praying that someday they would become United States citizens. I also heard about people working long hours when they first got here and then coming home and studying late into the night, trying to learn English and studying our history so that the day when they're able to take the citizen test, they'd be prepared. These people are very, very proud of earning the right to vote. And they are probably the people who are most strongly against allowing people who have not paid their dues to be given the right to vote in US elections.
And, Ken, one of our board members, Hasha McQueen, she is a immigration attorney, and she has an Hispanic background. And so she tells the stories of, it costing $20,000, $30,000 for an immigrant to become a citizen. They wait 5, 7, sometimes 10 years or longer to become a citizen. And so you can understand how these people would be a little hacked off by someone jumping in line and crossing the border illegally and be granted asylum almost and a green card to work, and people advocating for them to have a pathway to citizenship in Congress before them. You could see why they're not pleased about that.
Yeah, and if we look back, former President Trump, he basically launched his campaign on immigration. And the thing is, when we talk about immigration, we talk about legal immigration. To your point, both of you speaking eloquently about this is a land of opportunity, and the people that are working hard to get here legally want to contribute to our society, and any undermining of the election process or the immigration process, as we're seeing, our southern border is just wide open. And some of the biggest opponents of that type of migration are recent immigrants, because it's undermining their ability to work themselves through the American system, whether that's through starting their own job, starting at an entry level and moving their way through. They're seeing a lot of competition from that sector, but they're also, it is one of those things that we have to reward good behavior, not bad behavior. And letting people across the border is rewarding bad behavior.
And I tell you one thing that's been surprising, and we've talked about this on the radio show, is you would think that President Trump talking about closing the border and think some of the other measures that have been taken, secure our border, that would turn off Hispanic voters, Hispanic people. It's had the opposite effect. You look at the border counties down in Texas with Mexico, those politicians, those mayors are crying for help because their cities are being overrun. You look at the exit polls for this Virginia race. Glenn Youngkin got, I think, something like 40 or 50% of the Hispanic vote. You just look at 2020, President Trump increased his support among the Hispanic community and even increases his support among the African-American community, especially African-American males, where he scored at 20%, and he doubled his approval or doubled his rate with African-American women. So, as I said, we're having this illegal immigration. It's a bad thing. And the Biden administration and Kamala Harris are AWOL on it. And some of the rhetoric you would not think would be helpful for Republicans to attract Hispanic voters. But Hispanics are beginning to support Republican conservative values. And that's very encouraging. And I can't wait until the African-American community follows that trend as well.
That's a great transition into the 2022 election discussion. We're seeing all kinds of polls that the GOP, just the generic polls are showing the GOP way ahead. Those polls are just shots in time. We know that's not going to be the case, right up in front of the election. Once you start putting names and faces to these candidates, the polls start to change. But the key issue there, Chris, you hit on it. Youngkin had a formula. He really went after education. He went into the minority communities. He talked to recent immigrants. He was not afraid, as traditional GOP candidates have been, about talking to all the communities, because the GOP message is an inclusive message. It is a message that speaks to everyone. Is the Youngkin campaign a model for moving forward into 2022 for the GOP candidates?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a model. I had a chance twice to interview Glenn Youngkin for my podcast, Water Cooler Politics with Chris Arps. I interviewed him before the primary, and I had a chance to interview him after the primary when he won. And my first interview with him, he stressed all throughout the interview, he was talking about inclusivity. He wanted to be a candidate, a campaign for all Virginians. He said that inartfully in our second podcast, which got him in a little trouble and that made national headlines. I don't know if you guys remember, but he said in my podcast, he wanted to be the governor for all Virginians, Black Virginians, red Virginians, yellow Virginians. And the yellow Virginian line kind of upset some folks. And so that was a little controversy for a bit. But as we saw with the election and with the election of Winsome Sears, African-American female, as lieutenant governor, and then you have the attorney general candidate who was the first Hispanic attorney general, I think people rejected race in Virginia, rejected Terry McAuliffe trying to divide people by race and by class, and elected Glenn Youngkin. I think because he was new and didn't really have a lot of track record in politics, it's harder, let me say it, to run against someone like that. But I think the elephant in the room, and everyone that watches this and pundits and prognosticators agree, that because Donald Trump did not take an active role in that campaign, I think that was a big factor on why Glenn Youngkin won. And it also showed a big lesson that Virginia seemed to be trending more blue and more blue because of this last election in 2020. But I think what it really shows with the Youngkin victory is that some of the voters in the suburban voters in Virginia are still moderates. They just didn't like Donald Trump in 2020 and voted against him. But we haven't lost those voters completely, and Virginia is not a completely blue state yet.
Yeah, that's going to be a balancing act for all GOP candidates because President Trump's policies are good for America. The former president just has a propensity for making it personal. And I think Youngkin showed that you can accept the president's policies, not bring the president into it, but not be afraid to say that I'm my own person. People who are going to run on Donald Trump as their foundation, they are going to inspire the Democrats because President Trump brings out Democrats, I think, more than any other candidate does. So for GOP candidates going forward, that is going to be a balancing act. So what would you suggest as a GOP strategist for candidates in the 2022 election?
Donald Trump is unpredictable. So what race he decides to get in and endorse and not get in, that's going to be totally up to him. I don't think you can predict what that will be or stop him from doing that. I think one of the reasons why Donald Trump didn't get involved in the Glenn Youngkin race is because of Youngkin's campaign manager, Jeff Rowe. Jeff Rowe is a personal friend of mine. He's probably the premier political strategist in this country now. He ran Ted Cruz's presidential campaign. After Donald Trump won the presidency, Jeff Rowe was rumored for a job or for a post in the White House. So Jeff Rowe has a relationship with Donald Trump through the presidential campaign and for possibly getting a job in his administration. So I think Jeff Rowe was able to hold sway with Donald that, we can win this race. We want your support, but we don't want you in the state actively campaigning. And I think because of that relationship with Youngkin's campaign manager, that's why he didn't come in.
All right, let me make a couple points, and I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I think it's important that we remember a few things. Yes, Donald Trump definitely energizes his opponents. There's no doubt about that. Leaving aside the issues with absentee ballots and ballot harvesting and all the other potential fraudulent activity that took place during the 2020 election, there is no doubt that Democrats and Rhino Republicans do go out to the polls just to defeat Donald Trump. On the other hand, Donald Trump not only energizes the Republican base, he is a nuclear explosion to the Republican base. Let's remember the last two Republican presidential nominees prior to Donald Trump, and I think this is right. We had Mitt Romney and John McCain. We need to make sure we never, ever go back to the days of McCain and Romney. If we do, we will never win another election. Now, having said that, the Democrats and the media, which are the ones which are one and the same, have successfully demonized Donald Trump. No doubt about that. The Democrats and the media, if you recall, also demonized George W. Bush at the end of his term. And so we need to remember that every Republican candidate will be labeled a racist, a sexist, and all the rest, no matter who our candidate is. We're never going to have someone the Democrats and the media do not portray as the next Hitler. So I agree, it's a balancing act. We need somebody who fights back against the Democrats and the media like Donald Trump. But if we can find somebody who doesn't turn off moderates while at the same time fighting back, that would be fantastic. So I believe he would be fine with somebody else becoming president, but he would not be fine with somebody publicly distancing himself or herself away from him. That would be bad. If a Republican candidate distances him or herself away from Donald Trump, that's going to do two things. It's going to anger Donald Trump, and there'll probably be some type of a tweet storm. But more importantly, it's going to anger the millions and millions of Donald Trump followers. So I just think that's something we need to remember as we're talking about who's going to be the next Republican candidate. So what I hear you saying, Chris, is that Youngkin and his campaign manager did a really effective job of balancing those two interests.
Yeah, and Glenn Youngkin and Jeff Rowe and that campaign, they did it perfectly. And hopefully, some of these campaigns in the Senate cycle and the House cycle, they can do the same. You know, Republicans have a really great chance to take control of the House. I think that's a foregone conclusion. Now it's just how many seats. Some are talking 60, 70 upwards. But we also have a really good chance of taking over the Senate if Republican primary voters really love, but would find have difficulty winning a general election race. And, you know, we have something like that currently here in Missouri with former Governor Eric Greitens, who is running for Senate in a crowded field of 5 or 6 others. You know, your viewers may not be aware of former Eric Governor Greitens, but he was elected in 2016. By 2018, he resigned in a scandal with his hairdresser. It was his mistress. It was alleged that he took a picture of her while he had her tied up. That was a big deal. He resigned. Well, he's trying to make a political comeback and run for the seat of retiring Senator Roy Blunt. He is strongly fighting for the Donald Trump vote or endorsement. He has several people from the Trump organization, including Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is Donald Trump Jr.'s girlfriend. She is a spokesman for his campaign. He has others from the administration. So we should here in Missouri retain that seat, Republican seat. We're a very red state. But if Eric Greitens is our nominee for this Senate seat, I could see us losing this seat to a Democrat, because I think Republican and Democrat suburban women would have a very difficult time voting for him.
Yeah, Chris, one more question for you. I know that there's a lot of states going through redistricting right now. I just wanted to get your opinion. How do you think that's going to impact the Republicans and the Democrats? Do you look at it being positive for Republicans?
I think so, because Republicans control 27 out of the 50 state legislatures. So we're going to have an upper hand in that sense. And so because of that, I think we're going to gerrymander districts. And look, anyone that's in power and has the capability of do it will quote unquote gerrymander districts. So I think for a long time, for at least the next 10 years, Republicans should do very well in these congressional races. I tell you one interesting dynamic that I'm going to be looking for. You know, traditionally, the Democrats' power is in the cities. In Missouri, Democrats are in Kansas City, St. Louis, and Columbia, which is the college town. And the rural areas, you know, are of course Republican. Well, some of the Democrats are saying that that's going to be detrimental to Republicans in the future, because the rural areas are declining in population while the cities are continuing to grow, and that's going to hurt Republicans in the long run. But I think with all of this crime and defund the police and the mayhem that's going on right now in our cities, Richie, I don't know if it happens where you are, but because of the crime and the mayhem, a lot of people are moving out of the cities and are moving out into more rural suburban areas. So the great push that they think that the cities are going to help annihilate Republicans in the rural areas, it may not happen, because you may force these people out to rural areas, repopulating them.
It's happening here in New York, Chris. I'm up in Saratoga Springs, and this has been a summer community for New York City residents.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't find a house here because New York City residents are all moving up here to Saratoga Springs, which has traditionally been the most Republican district in New York,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So to your point, you're right on. Listen, we're running up against the clock here, but we have to have you back, because we need to talk about some of these strategies, some of the points you made about how is former President Trump going to play into these elections? What strategy is best for Republicans to take back the House? And so many more issues that we could talk all day. And Ken, do you want to close it out with Chris?
Absolutely, Rich. Chris, as always, it's been a pleasure talking with you. We appreciate you being our first guest on Hands on Politics 2.0. You always have an open invitation here on Hands on Politics. And there's one more thing. If you ever have a question or a comment for Rich or myself, please just shoot us an email at khand1329@icloud.com. Thank you.